This video is about using logic to draw conclusions based on a set of given information and to determine if a statement logically follows from the given information. So the law of detachment means if P to Q is true, then P is true and Q is true. So if the whole sentence makes sense, P to Q, then each part would be true. When we're doing law of detachment, make sure that to figure out if you can make a conclusion, you look and see, is the second statement coming from the hypothesis or from the conclusion? So number one, if you are late to class, then you will get attention. Jake was late for class. So notice that our hypothesis repeated twice. So because Jake was late to class, we can make a conclusion then that Jake will get a detention. Number 6, if you like country music, then you like to line dance. Nick likes to line dance. Now, the problem with this is line dance, like to line dance, is a conclusion. So just because Nick likes to line dance doesn't necessarily mean that he likes country music. We can't go backwards. We can't say, well, the conclusion is true, so the hypothesis is true. So in this case, because we are given a conclusion and another conclusion, we can't make another conclusion. So no conclusion can be drawn. Number 3, if you are homesick from school, then you will have to make up a test. Emily is sick home from school. So again, sick home from school, the hypothesis is repeated twice. So we can make the conclusion then that Emily will have to make up her test. Number 4, if a team scores the most points, then they will win the football game. Warren scored the most points. So again, most points and most points is showing up twice. So we can conclude that Warren won the football game. Number 5, what conclusion can be drawn from the following statement? So statement 1, if you make the basketball team, then you are an athlete. Statement 2, Bob is an athlete. Can we make a conclusion from this? Well, athlete is a conclusion from the original statement, so we don't know why Bob is an athlete, so we can't make any more conclusions, so no conclusion can be drawn. So the law of syllogism means if P to Q is true and Q to R is true, then P to R is true. So if one thing happens that leads to another and that thing leads to another, we can say the first just leads to the last. So for example, if you can read music, then you can play the guitar. If you can play the guitar, then you can keep a beat. So play the guitar was repeated twice, so we can take that out and we can just conclude if you can read music, then you can keep a beat, or you can keep a beat. Number 7, if the sun is shining, it is a beautiful day. Then it is a beautiful day. If it is a beautiful day, then we will have a picnic. Beautiful day was repeated as a hypothesis in the conclusion, so we can take those out and draw a new conclusion that if the sun is shining, then we will have a picnic. Number 8, if George goes to the zoos, then he will see the monkey. If George touches a stingray, then he will want to become a marine biologist. Now in this case, our conclusion of one sentence does not start with the hypothesis in the next sentence. So in this case, these are two sentences that don't really go together, so we would say no conclusion can be drawn. Number 9, what conclusion, if any, can be drawn from the following statement? So Jimmy is on the cross-country team, then Jimmy will run the race. If Jimmy runs the race, then he will win the race. So Jimmy will run the race has repeated twice So we can take that out and then form our new conclusion, which is if Jimmy's on the cross-country team, then Jimmy will win the race. Determine whether statement 3 follows logically from statement 1 or 2. So if it rains, then practice will be canceled. It rained Tuesday. So rains and rain, the hypothesis goes together. So we can logically conclude then that practice was canceled on Tuesday. This is true. Number 11, if Nick takes driver's ed, then he will get his license. If Nick gets his license, then he will buy a truck. So can we conclude if Nick takes driver's ed, then he will buy a truck? Yes, because get his license can be taken out of both sentences. So this is also true. It logically follows. Number 12, if Pam hits the bullseye, then she'll be the darts champ. Pam is the bullseye. It is the darts champ, so Pam hit the bullseye. This statement's false. Just because she's the champion goes with our conclusion. So we don't know why she's the champion. We just know that she is, so this is false. We don't know if she hit a bullseye. The fastest runner will win the race. Jill is the fastest runner. Jill won the race. This is true because fastest runner and fastest runner. So that means they'll win the race, so this is true. If a conclusion can be drawn from the given information, write the conclusion. If no conclusion can be drawn, then write no conclusion. So number 14, if an angle is 90 degrees, then it is a right angle. Angle K is 90 degrees. Well, 90 degrees is in the hypothesis, so we can conclude that angle K is a right angle. If Jim leaves early, he will be on time to school. If Jim is on time to school, then he will have time to talk to his friends. So being on time to school was repeated. So we can draw a conclusion then that if Jim leaves early, then he will have time to talk to his friends. Number 16, if Nick takes the kids to the zoo, they will see the monkeys first. The dolphin show costs extra. We're not really sure how those two things combine, so this would be a no conclusion. If Jen speeds in her car, then she will get pulled over. Jen drove 80 in a 55, which means she was speeding because she was going faster than her speed limit. So we can conclude that Jen will get pulled over. So we can also use notation as P to Q when working with the chain rule. One of the key concepts to remember is that if the conditional is true, then the contrapositive is also true. This means if P to Q is true, then not Q to not P is also true. So write the true contrapositive for each statement. So we're taking the negation and flipping the order. So in this case, we would have not D to not Q or K. So both of them didn't have the negation before, so now they are both negated. B, not J to not W. So we're going to switch our order and negate. So not W to J. Notice W didn't have the negation symbol before, now it does. And vice versa for J. It had the negation, now it doesn't. C, not C to not N. When I do the contrapositive then, I flip the order and take the opposite. So they had the negation, now both letters do not. So we're going to use the chain rule to organize some different statements with letters. So in A, we have A to not B, M to not X, and not A to X. So first we want to look at this problem and see what letter on the left-hand side is not repeated, if any. Well, M is not repeated anywhere else. A is because we have A and not A. So we're going to start with M. So we have M to not X. Now, whatever we end with in the first statement, we have to start with in the next statement. Right now, we don't have a not X. But remember, we can switch it by taking the contrapositive. So for this statement, we would have not X to A. So our next statement is not x to a. So A has to start the next sentence, which we have in the first one. So A to not B. Now, with the chain rule, remember you can cancel out things that repeat. So our conclusion then is M to not B. So in part B, I look and see what letters on the left, if any, have not been repeated. And I notice that J was not repeated anywhere else. So we're going to start with J. So we have J to K. Now we already have a statement that starts with K, so K to B. We have a statement that starts with B, B to not R. Now I need a not R. I have an R, but it's not in the beginning of the sentence, so I'm going to do my contrapositive. So now we have not R to C, not R to C. And I can cross out what repeats. So K repeats, B repeats, not R repeats, and our conclusion then is J to C. Pause this video and try C and D on your own. So in C, you should have started with D and got D to F. In part D, you could have started with either letter G or P. I started with G, which I got the conclusion then of G to not P. If you decide to start with P, you can take the contrapositive of what I got, and you would get P to not G. Both answers are correct. Draw conclusions. Remember that pictures are never drawn to scale, and that segments and angles are not congruent unless you are told otherwise. So let's see what conclusions we can use based on what we're given. So U is the midpoint of CB. So remember from Unit 1, a midpoint bisects a segment into two congruent parts. So we can say as our conclusion that CU is congruent to UB, and our reason is a midpoint bisects a segment into two congruent parts. Number 21, N is between C and D. Now, we don't know if it's in the middle or not, so we can't call it a midpoint. We can't say anything is congruent. We could conclude, though, that CN plus ND is equal to CD. And the reason for this would be segment addition, because remember, piece plus piece always equals the whole thing. Number 22, BE is perpendicular to AR. When things are perpendicular, this means that they form right angles. So for our conclusion, we can say BEA and angle BER are right angles. Our reason is that perpendicular lines form right angles. Number 23, given the diagram, we can conclude that angle 1 is congruent to angle 2 because these are vertical angles. Okay, remember that vertical angles are congruent. Set up an equation that represents each situation. Do not solve, justify why you decided to solve the way you did. So in number 24, we have two linear pairs and we have congruent angles already, which means if the other angles are congruent, then the angles with our variables also have to be congruent. So we would set up the equation 12x minus 3 equals 8x plus 27. Okay, and our reason is that if linear pairs have one congruent angle, then the other must also be congruent. Number 10, notice that I have perpendicular lines, so I have right angles. So I could set up the equations 10x plus 5y is equal to 90, and 14x minus 2y is also equal to 90. And our reason is that right angles are 90 degrees. Number 26, when I'm setting up an equation, this is forming a straight line, which remember has 180 degrees. So x squared plus 50 plus 12x plus 56 is equal to 180. And my reason is that the two angles form a straight angle, which is 180 degrees.